May 29th, 2026, the Yellow Band, Everest. The spring climbing season had officially ended. Dawa Sherpa was still on the mountain, alone, and the ladders were already coming down. This was not a normal Everest season, not even close. Nepal had issued 495 climbing permits this spring, the highest total in history. On May 20th, 274 people summited in a single day. And when the season closed, more than 1,000 climbers had reached the top of the world, and a Sherpa guide who helped make all of it possible was missing. But then everything changed. The part I find most extraordinary about this story is that it was not one terrible decision. It was a chain reaction. The most successful climbing season in Everest's history ended by leaving one of its own workers behind. This is the brutal June update on the Sherpa who went missing on Everest's final day. Welcome to Tourist Tragedies. To understand why what happened on May 29th matters, you have to understand what kind of season 2026 actually was. It started before a single climber took a step upward with a crisis. In early April, the icefall doctors encountered a massive, unstable serac, blocking the standard route through the Khumbu icefall. A serac is a tower of glacial ice that can collapse without any warning. This particular formation measured 55 meters long, 37 meters wide, and 28 meters tall. Picture a large office building made entirely of cracked and shifting ice, sitting directly across the only path to the world's highest summit. Both alternative routes that teams assessed were more dangerous, so the icefall doctors made the only decision available: route the path directly beneath it. Move fast. One person on a ladder at a time. Do not stop. For 19 days, no climber could advance. Hundreds of guides and permit holders waited at base camp, while the window for safe climbing got narrower. The part I find most striking is what that opening tells you about how this season was framed from the very start. To climb Everest in 2026, the first thing you did was walk under a collapsing ice tower the size of an office building. That was day one. So, who was on this mountain, and what did they put into it? 495 permit holders had each paid $15,000 just for the right to attempt the climb. That number does not include the guiding company, the logistics, the gear, or the supplemental oxygen. A fully supported guided Everest expedition costs a foreign climber anywhere from $40,000 to well over $100,000. For context, the average annual household income in Nepal is roughly $1,200. The people queuing for the summit were, in almost every case, extraordinarily wealthy by Nepali standards. The Sherpas and guides supporting those expeditions were not permit holders. They were exempt from fees, but they were doing the most dangerous work on the mountain. They fixed the ropes above Camp 2. They stocked the high camps with oxygen. They guided clients through the death zone, the section of the mountain above 8,000 meters where the human body begins to break down, regardless of how conditioned you are, in temperatures that regularly drop below -30 degrees Celsius. This season, the crowding made everything harder. The 19-day serac delay had compressed hundreds of summit bids into a dangerously narrow weather window. On the Lhotse face, the steep wall of ice between Camp 2 and Camp 4, climbers were queuing for hours in the death zone. Some teams reported spending 12 hours between the South Col and the summit on the busiest days. One of the guides working through all of that was Dawa Sherpa of Okaldhunga, a district in eastern Nepal. He was employed by Himalayan Traverse Adventure, a Kathmandu-based expedition company. His job was to escort a Polish climber to the summit and bring him back safely. By the final week of May, the mountain was winding down. The record-setting summit days were behind it. Most teams had already descended and returned to lower altitude. The ropes above base camp were being used by only a small number of late-season climbers, and the icefall doctors had begun preparations to dismantle the fixed ladders through the Khumbu icefall. The season was mechanically closing, piece by piece. A handful of expeditions were still pushing for the summit. Dawa Sherpa and his Polish client were among them. Their plan was to push from Camp 4, the South Col, at 7,900 meters. The South Col is the last campsite before the summit. Above it, There is no shelter and no meaningful margin for error. Each breath at that altitude delivers roughly 1/3 of the oxygen your lungs would receive at sea level. Experienced climbers describe the South Col as feeling like the edge of what a human body can survive. The cold penetrates through layers in ways you cannot fully prepare for. Winds cut in unpredictable directions. Hands and feet are always at risk. Every guide who works at that altitude knows what the early signs of frostbite look like before they become visible to anyone else. On May 28th, one day before the official end of the season, Dawa Sherpa and his client left Camp 4 and pushed for the summit. They reached it at 5 in the afternoon. That is an extremely late hour. Standard practice on Everest is to turn around by early to mid-afternoon at the latest. The descent from the summit to the South Col takes several hours even for experienced climbers moving well. Summiting at 5 in the afternoon means beginning that descent as the light fails, with oxygen supplies already depleted and the full physical cost of the ascent already on your body. But they had done it. Months of preparation, weeks at altitude, tens of thousands of dollars in fees and logistics. By the evening of May 28th, everything was on track. The goal had been achieved. All that remained was to get down safely. Then, on the South Col, the Polish climber began showing signs of frostbite. Frostbite at that altitude is not a minor inconvenience. Tissue begins to freeze and die. Every additional minute in the cold increases the damage irreversibly. The only rational response when frostbite appears at 7,900 meters is to begin descending immediately and without stopping. For Dawa Sherpa, that moment changed the entire calculus. His job was no longer just to guide. It was to get his client down alive. May 29th, 2026, the last official day of Nepal's spring climbing season. Dawa Sherpa and the Polish climber were descending from the South Col. The frostbite had made the decision for them. No deliberation, just the descent. But something had shifted. The Polish climber was moving faster, whether from the urgency of the frostbite, from fear, or simply from the instinct that pulls exhausted climbers toward lower ground. He had moved ahead of Dawa on the fixed ropes. He was following other descending climbers toward Camp 2. He was ahead, and moving further ahead with every step. Dawa was behind him, alone. The section they were passing through is called the Yellow Band. It is a horizontal stripe of yellowish sedimentary rock that wraps around Everest just above Camp 3 at around 7,300 meters. Climbers moving through it must navigate a mix of rock and ice, clipping and unclipping from fixed lines, placing every step with precision. At sea level, it would be a moderate technical section. At that altitude, after a summit push on a late-season descent, it demands everything you have left. Dawa Sherpa was somewhere in the Yellow Band, alone. The descending climbers moved past him. No one stopped, no one turned back. And here is the detail from the first 10 seconds of this video that did not make sense yet. By the afternoon of that same day, the fixed ladders in the Khumbu icefall, the only way on and off Everest from the south side, were being removed. The season was closing, and Dawa Sherpa was still on the mountain. You already know that no rescue came for Dawa Sherpa. But what you may not understand yet is why the system supposedly in place to prevent exactly this did not function. To understand that, you need to understand how the end of an Everest season actually works. Nepal's spring climbing season has a fixed official closing date. In 2026, that date was May 29th. It is not a suggestion. It is the date on which the government's field office at base camp closes. The liaison officers return to Kathmandu, and the icefall doctors begin dismantling the fixed ladders through the Khumbu icefall. Without the fixed ladders, the Khumbu icefall is impassable on foot. Once they are removed, anyone still above Camp 2 cannot descend without helicopter extraction, and high-altitude rescue above 7,000 meters is extremely difficult. At that altitude, the air is so thin that rotor blades generate dramatically less lift. Most helicopters cannot safely hover or land above roughly 6,000 meters. Rescue above Camp 3 typically requires a long line extraction or a specialist pilot willing to push the absolute limits of their aircraft. On May 29th, as Dawa Sherpa was somewhere near the yellow band, the ladders in the Khumbu icefall were already coming down. The remaining climbers at Camp 2 were being airlifted to base camp by helicopter. The season was closing from the bottom up, whether or not everyone had come down. Nobody launched a search for Dawa Sherpa that day, or the next day, or the day after that. May 29th, afternoon, the Polish climber descended to Camp 2. He was safe. Dawa Sherpa did not arrive at Camp 2. The expedition team waited. He did not come. The managing director of Himalayan Traverse Adventure confirmed it. Dawa had last been seen near the yellow band. Other descending climbers had passed him and reported he was alone. No one had stopped. No one had turned back. May 30th. No rescue attempt. No official statement from the Department of Tourism. The family in Okaldhunga had not been notified through any government channel. May 31st. The last ladders came out of the Khumbu icefall. A helicopter airlifted the final remaining climbers from Camp 2. The mountain was sealed. Still. No rescue. The expedition operator admitted it on record. 3 days after last contact, no search had been organized. Not one attempt. The 2026 Everest season closed with 1,008 confirmed summits, a record. 495 permits, a record. Over 1 billion Nepali rupees in royalty revenue from Everest alone, a record. And Dawa Sherpa, who helped make all of it possible, was somewhere on the mountain. Quick heads up, every week I drop a new update you won't find anywhere else. Please subscribe. Within the mountaineering community, the reaction was quick and uncomfortable. Expedition operators in Kathmandu publicly called on the Department of Tourism to issue clear updates and notify Dawa Sherpa's family without delay. One expedition official told the Kathmandu Post that even days after a guide went missing on Everest, the government mechanism still did not have clear information. Nepal had deployed approximately 60 liaison officers this season to monitor peaks above 6,500 meters. The mechanism was, in theory, in place. In practice, it produced nothing useful for the people asking the most basic questions about where Dawa Sherpa was. The body of an Indian climber who died near the Hillary Steppe in late May also remains on the summit ridge and could not be retrieved before the season closed. The mountain is sealed. The season is over. And as of June 2nd, the Department of Tourism had not issued a single official statement about Dawa Sherpa. When you lay the sequence of events in order, a clear picture begins to form. This was not a single failure. It was a pattern. I would call it the abandonment cascade. The first factor was timing. The summit at 5 in the afternoon on May 28th was extraordinarily late for an oxygen-assisted team. Every additional hour beyond mid-afternoon on Everest increases exposure time, depletes oxygen reserves, and raises the probability of exactly the complications that followed. A later summit meant a later descent, a later passage through the yellow band, and almost no remaining window before the season's closure machinery began. The second factor was the separation. When the Polish climber developed frostbite and began moving faster on the ropes, Dawa was left behind in the yellow band, while other climbers descended past him. This is a documented risk in high-traffic seasons. More people on the mountain does not mean more people watching out for each other. In a fixed-rope traffic jam at altitude, every climber is focused on their own survival. That is not a moral failure. It is the reality of the death zone. The third factor was the closure timing. The official end of the season on May 29th meant that the window for organized ground rescue was effectively zero the moment Dawa went missing. There was no buffer. There was no contingency for a guide who did not come down on the final day. The fourth factor demands the most scrutiny. Nepal deployed 60 liaison officers this season. The Department of Tourism generated over 1 billion Nepali rupees in royalty revenue from Everest alone. And yet, days after a Sherpa guide went missing at altitude, the government had no official information on the case, and the family had not been informed. The abandonment cascade is not a story about one bad actor. It is a story about a system built to count summits and collect revenue. with no functioning mechanism for stopping when one of its workers did not come down. The 2026 Everest season did not end with records. It ended with a Sherpa guide alone in the yellow band at 7,000 meters, the ladders going down below him and no search being organized above him. Do you think what happened to Dawa Sherpa reflects a system failure, or something more fundamental about who the industry was actually built to protect? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.